As we look at the lockdown regulations and how they affect the faith community, it's important for us to know that when we talk about the faith community in today's broadcast, we are not limiting it to only the Christian community alone, but we are looking at all the different kinds of faith, whether it's Hindu, whether it's Muslim, any kind of faith. And we are asking ourselves, how are these lockdown regulations affecting our community? I am Joyce Katende, and with me is my co-host, Harold Turige. Now, I'm requesting if they could share his profile or if they could say hi. Harold, my co-host, is a Christian lawyer, an advocate with a law degree from Makerere University and a diploma in legal practice, who is currently working with Pace Associates. He sits on several boards of a number of companies as an advisor and corporate secretary. He has also worked with Kahara and Company Advocates as counsel and East African Media Consult as the program's director. He is also the vision bearer of Rich Faith, which is a born-again fellowship for professionals and the business community in Uganda, focusing on fruitful, godly living. Harold, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I will return the favor and tell people about you. You're very welcome, everyone who's joining us today for this webinar discussion, and we hope it will be fruitful. My co-host, Joyce Katende, is a lawyer and is an advocate of the High Court with a master's degree in law from the United States of America. My co-host also specializes in international human rights and alternative dispute resolution. Apart from that, she's been a commissioner with the Equal Opportunities Commission and is the board member on the Uganda Women's Lawyers, which we all know as FIDA. And all around, she has a vast array of experience, I could say. And in private practice, she worked with Katende Sempebwa and Company Advocates. And also, she didn't miss on the academia, as she lectured under the grad law students of Uganda Christian University, both for the master's program and also at Uganda Management Institute. Joyce is also in the corporate world. She is not missing in that too, as she's the legal manager at National Water and Sewerage Corporation. And in the NGO world, she is the head legal and employment services at the Federation of Uganda Employers. I don't know what you left for other Ugandans to take, but she's literally everywhere. But most importantly, she's a Christian and also a Rotarian, passionate about helping our communities and services above self as they go by that tagline. And she is currently the president of the Rotary Club of Kampala, Naguru. So welcome with me, my co-host, Joyce Katende. And I'm very humbled to be the one to introduce you today.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Harold. A lot of what you've been sharing is my past work experience. So I don't want you to give Ugandans the wrong impression. So thank you. Thank you for that gracious introduction. And so now, why are we here and what is the purpose of this webinar? Why are we discussing lockdowns and the restriction regarding the faith community? Now, following the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, so it spread across the globe and eventually making its way to Uganda, the president announced measures and health guidelines intended to stall the spread of COVID, which included, among several others, an initial suspension of religious gatherings for about 1 month. I think that was the first announcement, right, Harold?
Yeah, sure. That was around the 18th of March, if we go by the same date that was the start of the whole lockdown measures.
Please continue.
Yeah, and after the 3 months have elapsed with the declarations and the regulations set in place, we remember that the president started to open up various sectors, but up to now, the religious community is still under the lockdown with no mention of possible resumption of gatherings and Christian or any religious fellowships unless a vaccine is discovered or is put on the market for people to to have access to it and for use in case the virus continues under the pandemic that is on. And this has caused unrest among the believers and those that believe in the different religions, since the religious community seems to be left out of any plan that is being made by the government. So there's a chance that the resumption of those congregations and Christian or any religious gatherings might not be as soon as people want them to be. And it's the basis of our discussion today to see how that can be addressed. Joyce.
You're so right, Harold. So the purpose of this webinar is therefore to champion a discussion on these actual issues affecting the religious community in times like this. And like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about religious community, we are talking about Christians, whether they're Anglican, Catholic, born again. We're talking about the Muslim community, the Hindu, whatever form of worship that you consider. So we are looking at how all these various communities seem to either be silent or maybe as a result of sheer with a resignation about what is going on and seem to have no voice. So that's why we have this webinar, for us to get to hear from different specialists and hear what are they trying to say, what is the religious community's opinion on what is going on. The expert panelists from the different fields that we have here are going to discuss with us and advise on what and how the religious community should consider going forward regarding this whole COVID situation.
Emphatically, the discussion is not only for the panelists, but and it's not biased or positively biased towards the Christian religion. It's general for whoever has faith into a higher being. Talk about Christians, talk about Muslims, talk about Hindus, everyone. It will be an interactive discussion for everyone that is following us on Facebook and via Zoom. So you can, we will at the end of it all invite the audience to participate in a way by sending in their comments, by sending in the questions to the panelists. So as the panelists discuss, make sure that you send in your comment or your question that we will discuss at the end, because we'll invite everyone to be part of that discussion at the end, because we have a special session for question and answers. And for the comments, we'll be reading them along me and my co-host as the panelists change the platform. Joyce can tell us how people can access on the social media platforms that have been set today.
Okay, thank you, Harold. So as we are going on with this discussion, please join the conversation. We need to hear from you. We need you to ask those questions that you're afraid to ask. We need you to comment. So we are live on Facebook at Crownell Co. So please join us live on Facebook if you're not already on the webinar, and also on Twitter at Crownell, at Company Crownell. So every time you're sharing, please tweet and use the hashtag Freedom of Worship Uganda and keep tweeting as often as possible. So now we begin the discussion. Welcome once again to all our viewers, those who are just joining us right now to this webinar and hot topic. Those of us joining on Facebook, you're also very welcome on all the other social media platforms. Now we know why we are here. Let's now get to know who are these panelists. And so I'm going to ask Harold to just list for us our different panelists who are going to be our specialists in today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joyce. In no order, we are privileged to host very distinguished people today to help us decipher what our topic is today. And among them, we have Dr. Patricia Achan Okilia. As we'll be reading the CVs later, but for now and currently, she's the commissioner with Uganda Human Rights Commission. She'll be here to tell us the bits and bits of the law as far as human rights is concerned and as far as religious freedoms are concerned. We are also privileged to have Honorable Alice Alaso, who's currently the Deputy National Coordinator for Alliance for National Transformation. She previously served as a Member of Parliament, and we'll get into the details as she takes the floor to discuss the topic today. We are also honored to have Bishop Zach Nirinjie. It's a face that everyone glad to see and a voice that everyone glad to hear from. He's a religious leader, he's a member of the Institute for the Religious, it's a faith and culture in public life that goes by the acronym Interface. And we are very glad to have you, Bishop. On the same floor, we have Mr. Emmanuel Kandia. I can see him smiling. He's the chairperson, the advisory committee, the commissioner at NetPIL, which is the Network for Public Interest Lawyers. We also have Mr. Arthur Ayorechide, who is a board member at the famous UECLF, which is the Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity. And finally, we have the CEO of Cornell Company Limited, Ms. Evelyn Naikoba. We are all glad to have you. And without further ado, I will let my co-hosts dig into the discussion and tell us who will be the first panelists and what they will be specifically handling. Joyce, please, over to you.
Thank you, Harold. Okay, before we go into the panelists, I just want to share with us a brief format of what this webinar is going to take. We shall first have a round of questions for each of our panelists, which is approximately 12 minutes each. This will be followed by an open Q&A session from all the members of our audience, whether you're on the webinar, whether you're on any of the social media platforms. And finally, we shall have a final round from the panelists who will share with us their concluding remarks. So in that regard, I'm requesting all our viewers and reminding you, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook, kindly share your comments and questions in the chat room so we can capture them for our panelists. Thank you. And now we start off this very critical discussion with none other than Dr. Patricia Achan Okiria, Commissioner with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. She is a lawyer and a human rights activist. She has a master's and a doctorate in human rights law from the University of Pretoria. She has worked with the Directorate of Ethics and Integrity for over 6 years as the Principal Legal Officer and later Acting Director for Legal Services. She has also worked with the Ministry of Works and Transport, where she worked as a policy and legal advisor, mainly in charge of legislative drafting for transport policies and laws. She has published several articles nationally and internationally. She has also made significant contributions by completing the preparation of several key anti-corruption legislation in Uganda, and is currently the Commissioner with Uganda Human Rights Commission. Please welcome Dr. Patricia Achan Okiria to this forum. Dr. Patricia, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Joyce, and thank you very much, my co-panelists. I'm humbled for that introduction, Joyce. But you forgot to tell them one thing, is that I'm also a housewife. I am married to one sister, the one and only, and I have 4 children, one girl and 2 boys.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Joyce. I think we can begin now.
Yes, thank you for making that note. It's important for all of us to know she's married to one spouse and who is a gentleman. That we need to make that very clear. And she has 4 beautiful children. So, Dr. Patricia, as an expert in human rights, what do you understand by the term religious freedom? And secondly, we have had various people stating that their right to freedom of worship has been infringed upon in the recent times. From a constitutional law perspective, what is your take on this? And have the current measures upheld this constitutional right, do you think?
Oh, thank you very much, Joyce. Speaking from a Christian perspective and a constitutional perspective as well, I know that religion for sure has a harmonizing role in society because it brings people of different perceptions together. Religious teachings normally impact on ethical thinking that also models the character of people. Religion has a demonstrable potential to engage social issues which have political or even legal implications, and it plays a positive role in the society and even the state at large. Religion, nonetheless, has also remained very key in communicating government directives during the lockdown. Although we are now having the challenge of having to stay away from church, we are missing to get the spiritual food from church. We are missing to have the social capital, the people we interact with from church. We are missing lots of things from our gatherings in our different religious institutions. However, that His Excellency the President, on one of his addresses on the 18th of March, if I recall, praised religious institutions. He praised religious leaders for complying with these directives to stop congregations. And the spirit behind stopping the congregations was basically to stop the spread of COVID-19. In Uganda, you realize that every citizen belongs to a particular religious conviction or the other. So religions basically have a very, very significant role, especially even in influencing decision making in our society, as history has already shown. Therefore, there is also need to define the conduct and relationship the state has and the role of religion during COVID. Going back to the constitutional significance or the constitutional perspective, when we talk about freedom of religion per se is guaranteed within the major international human rights instruments. That is Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's also provided for in Article 18 in the International Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it is even provided for within the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, specifically in Article 8 and our Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. So the Constitution specifically says within Article 29 that freedom of conscience, expression, movement, religion, assembly, and association is fully guaranteed. That's just to paraphrase the constitutional provision. So when you go to 29C, you find that it unpacks. It says freedom to practice any religion and manifest such practice, which shall include the right to belong to, the right to participate in the practices of any religious body or organization in a manner that is consistent with the Constitution. So basically, when we talk about the constitutional perspective, we find that we can marry this with the provisions within the international human rights instruments, and you find that it helps us basically to guarantee freedom of an individual or individuals within the community, with others, with the public or private, to manifest their religion, belief, or norms in order to worship, to observe, to practice, and use it also for teaching. This is why, as Christians, we can have fellowship with one another in churches. That is why the Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity meets in fellowship. That is why the Anglican Youth Fellowship Choir, where I belong, meet in fellowship. That is why the marrieds within our different fellowships meet. That is why we have Christian Women's Fellowship, Mothers Union, and others. Because it is provided for, it is guaranteed within the Constitution. However, as rights are not absolute, international human rights law gives states a margin of appreciation. What are we talking about here? The margin of appreciation is given to the states to be able to limit human rights of individuals based on the internationally accepted standards. Here we are, for example, we are talking about freedom of religion, and then we also have this pandemic coming in. So freedom of religion is subject to only the legal limitations that are necessary to protect the public safety, order, health, morals, and fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So His Excellency, through the State of Nation address on COVID and its implications, has given directives on how to prevent the spread of COVID in Uganda. And this was the spirit behind stopping the public gatherings in schools, in churches, and others. But now we are very hopeful that as they begin lifting the lockdown, we believe there will be opening of churches very soon. We believe that when churches open, we will have social distancing, we will observe the international those standard operation procedures of Ministry of Health, where we've had 3 services, probably we'll split into 7 or 8 services a day, and we'll be able to enjoy our freedom of worship and in our churches. It's also important that Ugandans get to know and appreciate that measures to prevent COVID affects constitutional rights. It limits, like freedom of worship, like we've already said, and these rights are basically affected. So gathering of people is prohibited. the state shall institute effective machinery within the national objectives and directive principles of state policy, specifically under Objective 23. It says the state shall institute effective machinery for dealing with any hazard or disaster arising out of natural calamities or any situation which results into disruption of normal life. So we have all seen that this COVID has disrupted normal life. It has disrupted our normal life. We cannot continue with our activities as usual. That is why the lockdown has impacted on a number of things in the country. So as Christians, my own normal life involves fellowshipping with other fellow Christians. And that is what helps us grow. That is what has made some of us what we are today. Because if I did not get born again in 1989, many years ago, I don't think I would be what I am today. So this pandemic has disrupted our normal life. We cannot fellowship anymore with others. This is what strengthens us. This is what keeps us going as children of God. COVID-19 has made us adopt to different challenges, different ways of strengthening fellowship within the family, studying the Word of God and praying together as family. Although it would be most interesting for us to interact with others out there and share our experiences and testimonies. So legally,
Dr. Patricia, yes, just to interject at this point.
Yes.
You have mentioned all the benefits of us being able to congregate, to being able to share with one another, and how important it is, whatever religious group you are, meeting with one another, how it's very helpful, not only for your physical state, but even your mental and social well-being. Dr. Patricia, you've written an article in the New Vision. Yes. I think it's titled Human Rights Best Effective Response to COVID-19 in Uganda. I think it was on the 7th of April. In it, you mention a number of articles in the Constitution, and you state that the rights and the freedoms of the individual and groups enshrined in the Constitution shall be respected, they shall be upheld, they shall be promoted by all organs and agencies of government and by all persons. Do you feel that is what is happening in Uganda? And yes, I know we have the COVID, that, the whole spread and everything. But do you feel that maybe there's another way in achieving the purpose for which the ban of places of worship was imposed? And also, you've been sharing with us as an individual. I would want to hear, what is your perspective as a commissioner in the Human Rights Commission? How can you help?
Thank you very much, Joyce. As a commissioner with the Human Rights Commission, UHRC as an institution is with a core mandate to protect human rights. We are very much alive to the human rights aspects of COVID-19. We have been monitoring the human rights situation in the country in respect to COVID-19. We have received a number of complaints of human rights violations by COVID during this implementation of the COVID regulations. You have watched and seen over the news about how COVID has not killed anybody, but the security agencies have actually killed some people in the process of implementing the directives. And yet legally, we see that the presidential directive has been made in good faith. It has been hinged on the Public Health Act and the different directives, which has empowered the Minister of Health to take lead, ensure that these measures to combat the pandemic are implemented properly in a good way. But you find that we have had challenges of the people who are enforcing these directives not being well trained. For instance, the LDUs, when they started, they thought it was about caning everybody. When they curfew, they thought they would go around caning and beating everybody. But of course, that was handled, although in the countryside, we have still continued to receive a number of complaints. And the challenge is we receive these complaints, by the way, on remote, where somebody makes a telephone call. We cannot go out to investigate because we are all under lockdown. We have registered these complaints. We have taken action on some, action still on remote by making a phone call, maybe to the RDC, saying what is happening here. Can this person be released at once? This person was helping a sick child, and this person got arrested along the way while going to solve a situation in hospital and things like that. So it has been very, very challenging. But I thought we would maybe concentrate more on the role of the religious actors. How can the religious institutions come out as this institution that is very, very essential during COVID? Because people have been locked down, people have been traumatized, people have been scared, people have been worried, and they need the church to come out clearly to help in counseling the people, to give them words of encouragement, to help people to know that this is not the end of it all during COVID. So as religious actors, I believe we are supposed to be very, very relevant out there. We are first of all called to work together to encourage our own members to observe these directives, not to go against these directives, so that there are no clashes here and there. Religious actors are very essential and should be at the forefront, like we have already said, especially in awareness creation based on the holistic response. You know, the church is like a holistic institution. The mosque also acts as holistic institutions, which bring a number of people, and they're able to share this information to do with fighting this pandemic in an accurate manner. But here, people are left to rely on fake news, and sometimes it takes time before this fake news can even be corrected or cancelled. So this can be
Dr. Patricia, thank you. So I'm going to put a pause because you have a lot to share with us, and let's hear from some of the other panelists, and we'll come back to you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Harold.
It's already getting hot. I can see Dr. Hart more and more. It's very interesting because you can see she's sharing from the heart, and I am sure of where she's standing between a Christian and then someone also as an advocate of human rights. But it's on that point that I want to bring on Mr. Emma Kandia. Emma, can you get me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I would like to start you on after those who do not know Emma. He's the chairperson of the Network for Public Interest Lawyers, that is NetPIL, which is an organization that is set up for the aim of promoting public interest lawyering to foster greater engagement of lawyers in public interest. He's also an advocate and a commissioner for oaths and a founding partner for Kandia Advocates and legal consultants. That's right, Mr. Emmanuel?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, he's also experienced as a dispute resolution lawyer, and I'm sure he will help us on that point to make sure this is resolved, because it seems to be a very, very big dispute. But let me give you a statistic and kick you off on that. Uganda has, by people who believe, Uganda has 85% of believers being Christians, with 42% being Roman Catholics, 36 Anglicans, 7 evangelical or Pentecostal or Orthodox, whatever you want to call them, and 12 Islam. And it is said that only 3% of Ugandans do not believe in anything. So we are addressing an issue that is talking about 97% of Ugandans, of the 40 millions that we have. So that's where I want to engage you in the next around 12 minutes to ask that, as a representative of public interest lawyers, what is your take on the current status of the religious rights vis-a-vis the public interest that you're interested in? And do faithfuls in the circumstances have a cause of action, or it is justified? That's how things should be.
Thank you so much, Harold, for inviting me and for the whole organization for this webinar. Glad to participate here. You have started on a very interesting statistic. I did actually check out the Uganda Bureau of Statistics latest output from the population census, housing and population census of 2014, which actually has a different setup in figures, that actually up to 99.98% of Ugandans are practicing some form of religion or affiliated to some
religion. They believe in a higher power.
The number is higher. Only 0.2% of the population as of 2014 had no religion or a religious affiliation. And so that would tell you very categorically that Uganda is a religious nation in terms of how the population is structured. Now, religious practices in Uganda have an integral part, not just in the belief system of the people, but it informs the culture of the people of Uganda. Religion is more than just an idea. It is a practice. It is how people express their culture, how they express themselves. Religious entities give people an identity, and it frames their worldviews, the patterns of thought, and their life philosophies. Now, various religious organizations have also given opportunities for Ugandans, not just to associate, but to socialize, as has been earlier said, and to organize themselves in areas of economics, in areas of social life, sometimes even in politics. You will find in political times when elections are on, many of these MPs run to congregations, mosques, churches. They go and do campaigns there because that is a very critical area for mobilization and organizing for political power. And so religion is not just something that, in my view, should be taken lightly. Religion has greatly contributed to efforts, especially in providing services to communities. There are a number of schools in Uganda that are owned by faith-based organizations and religions, a number of health care services. There are banks and financial institutions, SACCOs, and the like that are affiliated to religious entities. So religion is more than just for spiritual nourishment and teachings and guidance and counseling. And you will realize the lockdown, as has already been talked about, brought in the concept of social distancing and putting on masks, now sanitizing of hands. You have these things that have been laid down by government, and as noted, in good faith, because the population needs to be able to be secure, needs to be healthy in order to enjoy those rights. And even if they were enjoying those rights and they are infected, perhaps they could become a danger to their neighbors. And so they are in good faith. However, the impact of them has affected so many people, especially I'll speak to the religious enjoyment of the religious rights. The one key thing that happens with these religions broadly is that their expression is largely through congregational worship and prayers and teaching and preaching by the leaders, either a pastor or an imam or whatever leadership structure that there is. And sometimes this then requires the population to gather in places, sometimes they are sacred places of worship, to be able to receive this kind of teachings or do that kind of worship. Now, other aspects, for example, during this lockdown, we're told people should now do scientific weddings. Now, what is a wedding? A wedding perhaps would be, in a scientific form, understood as a vow between one or two people. But there is a higher context that perhaps we need to look at and examine, because marriage in our context is more than just a two-people affair. It involves families.
That's
it
true.
Involves communities. And so if we are going to have scientific weddings, what does that have to say with regard to the context of vows people make, the context of what understanding of family is in each of these religious settings. For example, in the in Christendom, the family is a very critical area where children are instructed, where there is a fellowship. Yes, there is union together and bringing up of children and growing up communities starts at that point. So that's where communities get fully involved to participate. And so if it is scientific, to what extent do the communities manifest their belief in the family structure?
Mr. Emma, that's where exactly I want to engage you on us using this as a challenge to you, for example, as a public interest litigant and a lawyer.
Yes.
Do the Christians, the Muslims, and every believer who thinks this is unfair have a recourse to action? What is the solution on the ground, and what is any platform that they can seek that solution?
First of all, there has to be an extensive analysis done as to whether there is a ground for action.
Okay.
And the basis in picking that must come from the structuring of the orders or the directives of government. And are those directives sourced within the law? And Dr. Patricia has exactly stated that it is true they are sourced within the law, that the government can regulate how these particular rights can be enjoyed, and sometimes even stop the enjoying of them for other greater public. And so in our circumstances, especially with the COVID-19 in place, there is justification thus far for these churches, for these worship places to be closed. However, what then needs to be coming out, I believe, very closely and clearly, and for our evaluation for any action to take place, is whether the continued sustenance of the lockdown is justified. Now, that might need a more scientific analysis. It might need a more scientific evidence. And you don't just go to court to make noise. You must come with proof to show that the ongoing lockdown is unjustified. And if there is proof to that extent, I can guarantee we'll win the day in court. But if there is no scientific justification or evidence that we can effectively rely on to say that the lockdown is unjustified, then to that end, the inaction would not be valid. However,
because assuming the shoes of an ardent believer, it's evident that we might not have a vaccine soon, because even the scientists and those who are at the center of it are saying in 18 months, in 12, others are saying it can even take more than that. So that's why I wanted to engage you on the point, and related to another point of how far should a state have that control of religious affairs? Is it justified for that constant control of religious affairs and faith-related aspects of people's lives? Because in the past, we have had people arrested, people worshipping without shirts arrested, people related to Chiwetere cult arrested. How much should the state get involved in these affairs? That's a final one for you.
First of all, Article 7 of the Constitution of Uganda states very clear that the government of Uganda or Uganda shall not adopt a state religion. What that means is that Ugandans would be free from any official dogma or doctrine perpetrated or pushed by the state. And in essence, people are free to worship almost anything or nothing at all. And that's why when you see the statistics from from UBOS, it is clear that there are at least 0.2% of the Ugandan population that do not affiliate to any religion. And they are guaranteed that protection because it is their right not to have any higher being they ascribe to. That said, the Constitution, in that perspective, does not therefore give that mandate to the government to entrench into how people should worship, what they should worship, when they should worship. In that regard, if the government took that direction, it would be in violation of the Constitution. The Constitution is our supreme law, and we will stick to it as is, and will uphold it and protect it. And interferences into religious practice are only to the extent that they are in violation of the law. Yes, if there are cultic practices and religious practices that violate the law, for example, some practices into ritualism where people sacrifice children or mutilate bodies or practice violence against people, those are not permitted under the law. And to that extent, the government is justified in stopping such activity. I hope I've responded to you well.
Yes, you have. And that's on that point as we sign off for your flow. In your personal opinion, do you think some of the faithfuls that are calling for a regulated kind of resumption of congregational worship, do you think their call is justified?
I want to say this, that the call for opening up so that people go and worship is a justified call, to the extent that, one, so many people have, during this lockdown, suffered mental breakdowns. Families are breaking down because religious entities have played a very, very fundamental role in counseling communities and people and helping them cope with life and life's challenges. And so, because of this lockdown, there are a number of communities that have not had access to worship experiences and counseling, and that has affected their lives. We've seen through this COVID-19 a spiking up of figures of domestic violence, a spiking up of figures of sexual and gender-based violence. And those are things that religious entities can speak to and be able to calm societies down and cope with life. However, when there is an opening, it is, in my view, very important to note that COVID-19 is still around and that people die from it. And therefore, if there is an opening, that opening should have clear regard to the social distancing and the health guidelines that are put up by the government. And so that might have a very big implication on how churches or worship places are run and how they will function going forward until perhaps the situation is done away with.
Wow, thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel. If I got something from what he said in Uganda, you're free to worship anything or not to worship at all. And I would like to remind everyone that is watching us to continue to engage us on our social media pages. And we have the Twitter. We are proceeding under the hashtag Freedom of Worship Uganda. And on Facebook, we are live on the Cornell CO page, and we have a series of comments. We will be reading them at the end, but we have the likes of Viola Balson saying, I can't imagine worshiping in a mask. Joyce, Mr. Senyonga Simon is saying the design of the SOPs in regard to freedom of worship could be a potential portal of smuggling some provisions of the unpopular, illegal religious policy. And it is on that point that I would like you to engage our next discussant on that point that directly relates to that famous
religion
policy and how we can go about in relation to the regulations at hand. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you, Harold. This discussion is getting quite interesting. And now we have an even more interesting panelist. I'm sure he's known to everyone. I don't need to introduce him, but for those of us who if you've just crawled out of a cave and you don't know who he is, his name is Bishop Zach Nirinje. Anyone who knows him knows that he has a distinguished career as a theologian. He's a mission leader. He's a pastor. He's an HIV/AIDS activist. He's an organizational development consultant. And of course, we know his role in the Kampala Diocese with the Church of Uganda. His first degree was in physics from Makerere University, Uganda. He received his master's in theology from Wheaton College, Illinois, and his PhD in theology and mission history from Edinburgh University. Bishop Zach is also a part of leaders in religion, academia, media, profession, and cultural institutions coming together with a shared vision to create a platform for dialogue, research, documentation on the role and the place of religion, faith, and culture in shaping the public life. Please welcome Bishop Zach Nirinje. Bishop Zach, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you stopped introducing.
I could go on and on. But Bishop Zach, you have heard already how the conversation is moving about the whole lockdown, about how it's affecting the different faiths, whether it's Christian, Catholic, born again, Muslim, Hindu, and how it's affecting people's desire to worship and congregate. And everyone is pointing their hands to you, the religious leaders. We've talked to Dr. Patricia, and she's saying, you know what, when it comes to issues of human rights and this whole aspect of religion, you have to take a central role in ensuring that the public, the different congregants, are in their right state of mind. So I want you to share with us, in your opinion, what is the role of the religious community and faith leaders in peculiar times like these?
Thank you very much, Joyce, and thank you, colleagues, fellow panelists, and it's a privilege to be part of this conversation. And it's big, it's significant. First, I think let's reflect on a crisis of the magnitude of the kind we have, the COVID-19 pandemic, and what that does to our country, to our people, and now very specifically to a particular aspect of life which relates to faith crisis. I think the point I need to make here is that every crisis brings to, exposes what exists. It brings to the fore. So to apply this, there's a way in which this crisis is bringing out of the ground, out of the woods, some things that we knew were there, but maybe not as obvious. And there will be some that relate directly to the nature of the state, the Ugandan state, and that therefore also the nature of religion and faith in this country. And a pandemic like this helps raise significant questions. One of those is the extent and the limitations of state power in regulating people's lives. And I don't think we're having enough conversation about that. The extent and limitations of the state. I hear my friends, lawyers, making reference constantly to the Constitution and the Constitution. You've got to remember and put this in our historical context. President Museveni at one point said that he can't just run a country based on a mere piece of paper. So we've got to really ask ourselves questions. Even those of you who are lawyers, you keep referring to the Constitution. The other day when the Constitution was changed in ways that are completely unacceptable, that look at very irregular, money was exchanging hands. Guys, lawyers, you kept saying we must uphold the Constitution. You said nothing. So I hear you referring to the Constitution and the sacredness of the Constitution, but I honestly don't know whether you guys mean it. So let me first deal with you. Because you keep making reference to a constitution as though it is sacrosanct. So, but the point I'm raising here is the extent and the limitations of the exercise of state power in regulating people's lives. The second, and more poignantly relating to what we are dealing with, is the nature of religion in Uganda, the nature of religion. And I mean, I kind of wish, and I had hoped that would have people from the different religious traditions who can therefore speak about the nature, the content, both the form and the substance of the different traditions, because that would help us, because there is not a one-size-fits-all in terms of understanding about what this really means for the nature, for example, the nature of Christianity. Even when you speak about Christianity, there is a different nuance from the Catholic tradition, a different nuance from those within the Anglican or Baptist or Pentecostal. So in many ways, we will be really fairly superficial in this conversation because we don't have the capacity for digging deeper. But the point I'm raising, a crisis like this helps raise the question about the nature of religion in Uganda. We can make reference to the numbers, and then we want to say, so what, these numbers, which raises, therefore, the question about religious leadership. And let me come to the nature of the crisis, therefore. The crisis is not the COVID-19 pandemic. The crisis is the lockdown measures, And first of all, we've got to remember that this is not the first major pandemic hitting a country. The numbers due to the whole HIV and AIDS pandemic are massive. I don't ever remember, because we knew that HIV and AIDS was being passed on primarily through sexual relationships. And there's those sexual relationships, some within commitments of marriage, and the majority outside the commitments of marriage. I don't ever remember hotels being closed down, brothels being closed down, ways in which sexual contact of people were hampered. And yet, the pandemic expanded and more people have died. So we've got to ask ourselves, what is particular about this pandemic that causes the kinds of levels of lockdown measures that have been imposed upon us? And these are questions that cannot just be answered by science. And this whole question of scientific this, scientific the other. I am a student of science. As you heard, my first degree is in physics. I was doing a master's. I was working on a master's in physics. And I hear science this, science the other. And I'm thinking, can we find other ways to talk about what we are doing? Because it's not all science. It is not all science. It's not all science. Let's find other ways of speaking about what we are doing, other than just using the word. Presidents are very powerful, how they create narratives. Now I'm even told there is a scientific election, scientific wedding, and so on. So my own take on this is that while the president exercised his powers as president, that's number one. But secondly, the president was very clear. He was also exercising his powers as the commander-in-chief. And he was also very clear that he's executing this as a war. And so he's the commander-in-chief. And I hope you have noticed that among the top leadership in terms of what is happening in this country, the enforcing of the lockdown, it's literally the military machine, the security machine that is over and upon us. You will recall that even in the managing of gatherings, the whole curfew and all of that, who is out on the street? Guys, who is distributing food? Who is distributing food? It is the military. It is the police. It is, I think, the only, in the beginnings, first 2 months, it was Red Cross together. I think that IRCU, the Inter-Religious Council of Uganda, tried to come in and simply late coming. So I want us to remember that context in which we are. And then, here is my substantial point, I guess. It is that really the religious leadership voice. My contention is this, that we have let the president, we have let the Ministry of Health become the primary definers of how we live our lives in this time. And that, I think, is problematic. Now, it is not surprising because we have an overbearing state. We have an overbearing president who uses military and security means to control us. It is not surprising. However, it is not acceptable that, for example, a presidential directive decides how people get married, because there are clear prescriptions within the Christian tradition, within the Islamic tradition, within other traditions, faith traditions, on what a Christian wedding looks like, on what an Islamic wedding looks like. To blanket everything, most scientific wedding should not be acceptable to the faith leadership community. Let me speak very specifically.
I'm glad you're pointing that out. Mm-hmm.
Let me speak very
I'm
specifically.
glad you're pointing that out, Bishop Zach. Mm-hmm.
Let me come to the next point about the whole question of faith life. And too many people are overtly concerned about the fact that people can't gather in numbers, whether on Fridays or on Saturdays or on Sundays or whatever other day of gathering for fellowships in the different numbers. But that is to reduce faith life to gathering, to congregating. From the perspective from which I come, it is Christian, the broader Christian tradition. I would say that Christianity is not just about gathering, it's also about scattering. Many of you know the expression salt and light. Salt and light are not what happens when you are together, is what happens when you scatter. You scatter into the world. So faith life is both in the gathering as it is in the scattering. It is true that the COVID-19 lockdown measures have especially affected the gathering. And that's understandable to some degree. But we have to engage with the extent to which that is right and justifiable. We have to engage with it. And I honestly had hoped, just like Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity, you should have come out and explained to us what are the perspectives from, because you say you're Christian Lawyers Fellowship, what's the perspective from Christianity about these lockdown measures? Because you are supposed to interpret law from the Christian angle. We haven't heard you. What we needed to hear as well from the faith leadership is, what does it mean? Let's hear from the Roman Catholic Church. Let's hear from the Church of Uganda. In fact, the Uganda Joint Christian Council, which have a protocol around a Christian marriage. What does a Christian marriage now look like, Christian wedding look like, in the light of the lockdown? The Uganda Joint Christian Council has not given us that answer. We have not heard how, therefore, these lockdown measures can be interpreted from within the light of the different religious traditions. And part of the challenge is that religious leaders have ceded their space to the executive, the president, to the military. I speak about one other, which is the whole question of compassion. Of the religions I know, which is Christianity and Islam, I know that part of the hallmark of those faith traditions is compassion. It's the neighbor. It is food. It's help for the neighbor. I was shocked. I was surprised that we all accepted that nobody else could participate in distributing food. I mean, it was given, it was accepted. And I still can remember some bishops, friends, pastors pleading with the government, please allow us to give food, to contribute, to participate in compassion. The government cannot give, the government cannot take away what it can't give. It is not the state's job to tell us what we can do with our neighbors. It can do and tell us. We can engage with the state on how that is regulated. So already, really, religion in Uganda is beginning to look very, very irrelevant. Because, you know, my proposal has been, now that the churches are closed to congregation, what a great opportunity. We should have turned those church buildings, we should have turned those mosque buildings into warehouses for food for the communities. That is what faith life ought to be about. But we're absent. We're simply clamoring for open so we can gather again. You see, I think it's Emmanuel who spoke about there is trauma, there is depression, people are not receiving the encouragement, the services. So that is to say that the religious and faith teachings we have been given in all these years have really not had the deep impact that they ought. So we are now in panic. If marriages are breaking down in this COVID-19 lockdown, it shows that marriages have been unhealthy. If you have domestic violence on the high scale that it is, it says something about what we, faith leaders, have been doing. It means that there has been such underground, the level. So these, for me, I would say, for those of us who are faith leaders, it's time for thinking deeply. What does our faith mean in society? Because the crisis, it seems to me, has caused us to be found wanting. So it is necessary that we talk about how we ought to gather. It is necessary that we talk about what we do when we do not gather. It is necessary that we talk about the implications of these measures from our different traditions. And it is important that we do not cede space to the state. Otherwise, the state tomorrow will be able to say scientific this, scientific the other. We must be able to come back and say, no, a Christian wedding is a Christian wedding. It cannot be called scientific. It's a Christian wedding. But within the current crisis, this is how we adjust a Muslim wedding and so on. We cannot be here talking about a scientific election. What does that look like? So I think that really, for me, the challenge is that the religious and faith leadership and the cultural leadership have ceded the space to the overbearing state. And no amount of quoting the Constitution helps. Because I can tell you that Constitution was created by this very state, all right? And they will be able to bring about other laws. There has been a debate as to whether it was adequate to use the Health Act and whether there shouldn't have been an emergency. I had actually hoped that you, my friends from the Christian Lawyers Fraternity and Religious Faith Fraternity, you would be engaging with those questions. So I think that, yes, it raises deep questions, and I think there is hard work to be done in terms of engaging with what, therefore, does religion and faith mean in our society, and therefore, what does religious leadership look like?
Wow, thank you so much, Bishop Zach. Very, very interesting. Actually, you've preempted many of the questions that I was going to ask, and you've gone ahead and answered them. But because of
most
time,
of the bullets were fired towards Arthur as Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity.
No, you are included. You are included, my brother. No. I think it's all of us. Because we all say we belong to a particular faith tradition. Have you talked to your bishop, your pastor? Have you engaged with them as to why you are not involved in food distribution? Why you're not participating in all these activities that ought to be the faith life of every individual?
Thank you, Bishop Zach. You're always very interesting to listen to. Now, I'm going to put a pause on our questions to you, but I'm going to give you like a sneak peek in when we come back for round two, some of the questions that will be coming to you based on what you've just said. There's a comment from Patience Migisha who says, a sanctuary can never be a storehouse. What is sacred must remain sacred. So you can't propose that churches become storehouses. Even as you think about that, I would like you, when we come back, to think about what is the proposed way forward for congregational worship to resume without spreading the COVID like a bushfire. You mentioned the fact that in times like this, Christianity has both to congregate and to disperse. But what about the fact that we all believe God is omnipresent, but we all still need and feel and desire to congregate? So those are some of the questions that will be coming up later for you. And for right now, I would like to hand over to Harold for our next panelist. Thank you so much, Bishop Zach.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's getting hotter in the comment section. People are making noise on Facebook, Twitter, and those who are attending via the Zoom app. I have seen an interesting comment from Awan Baluka Margaret, who says, I love you, Dr. Zach. Are Christians asking themselves whether they have applied what they have been being taught throughout, or they just want to just gather yet, never coming to the knowledge of understanding? It shows you how some of the Christians and other believers are wondering and very concerned about the times. I don't know whether we have Honorable Alaso online already. And as she comes on, maybe Joyce, you can tell us what is on Zoom as far as the comments and questions are concerned.
Thank you, Arthur. I'm just getting a little network issue. There's a comment from Catherine Asiku. The church has grown, and now the church is also scattered in different homes. And in her opinion, that is even more powerful. Having fewer people at a wedding doesn't make it a wedding. I think the description of a scientific wedding is wrongly placed. And she also says that the church has grown and the church is also scattered in homes. So if we are to say that we have scientific weddings, she's not agreeable with that. Let me see. I'm trying to locate some others. There's one from Olivia, which says, in her view, COVID-19 related SOPs in places of worship, is in themselves an infringement on the way of manner of worship, thus constituting government interfering with faith-based acts of worship as enshrined in Article 7 of the Constitution. So for the government to basically decide how someone should worship, they are infringing. And I think that also points to what Bishop Zach is saying, is the state now controlling the church. Over to you, Harold.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'd like to remind the people, let's have more engagement on Twitter. And the handle is at Company Crownell. That is COMPANYCROWNEL. And our hashtag is Freedom of Worship Uganda. We have more comments on Facebook. That is Theos Francis Nyakoja saying, allowing ourselves to be peripheral to the state. And Prema Komisha is saying that Christian leaders have conceded power to the state. We have more and more comments, and we'll dive into our next panelist. Honorable Alaso, are we on? Honorable, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You're very welcome, Honorable.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be part of this engagement.
Yeah, we are privileged to have you too. You recently wrote, I would like to engage you based on the article that you wrote of recent that was about the need to open places of worship. And it was very interesting because you seemed all in the opening without having due regard of what people are using as an explanation to the lockdown due to COVID-19 and the rest. So on that point, what influenced your firm stand in the wake of what appears to be a deadly outbreak for you to take such a strong stand to say, let us open places of worship?
Thank you, Harold. As I said, it's a privilege to be part of this discussion, and I am happy to hear from the previous panelists who have spoken. Harold, I wrote that piece largely to express my personal feeling and what I know about myself. As you know, I signed off as a worshiper of the living God.
That's very true.
What I know about myself, and I suppose the 97% of Ugandans who believe in some form of deity or divinity, is that we are spiritual beings, first and foremost. And so at the heart of that submission was a feeling that the person who goes into, because the night before, the president had eased restrictions on shopping malls, he had eased the restrictions on public transport, and so many others. And so I asked myself, at the heart of the person who is walking into the shopping mall is actually a worshiper, meaning 97% who go into the shopping mall are worshippers. 97% of those who will sit in the buses are worshippers. They are spiritual beings, and they have that feeling to worship the divinity that they believe in. And therefore, I asked myself, what is the difference between the person who will walk and operate in a shopping mall and the other one who will go to church? Because if you ease restrictions on a bus coming all the way from him, and people are sitting half a meter from each other, and you find it difficult to ease the lockdown churches, which churches have compounds, which churches can afford to see people 3-4 meters away from each other. Then the problem is not just about managing the park. I think there is an attempt to manage our spirit, the spirit being in me. And that one I am reluctant to cede to the state to begin to manage my relationship with my God. That is totally unacceptable. So I found it very strange. And that's even for this conversation. I was listening to Mr. Chanda, and he was still referring to lockdown. Where I am as I talk now, that animal called lockdown is not operating. The streets are so busy, but about 3 people. The shops are open, the hotels are open. I mean, life is going on normally. They only adhere to religious leaders. And that for me is a problem.
Let me get you right on that point to
similar.
Yeah, Honorable Lasso, let me get you on that point. I would like to quote what the president said at one point, where he was invited to as a guest in the Passover festival, and he said, "I decided not to regulate born-again churches because the Constitution allows to them." It seems that it's a decision that he can take and rescind. And I would like to engage you as the Deputy National Coordinator for ANT. What, in your opinion, is the primary role faith and religion play in the influence of politics and national building?
I think there's a bit of hitch there. I couldn't get the last half of the sentence. What, in my view, is?
What, in your view, is the primary role of faith and religion in national building and politics?
Of course, I didn't come in here as the ANT leader, but let me speak about.
I'm engaging you as a person who is live to politics and how national building is framed.
Yes, I want to imagine that the church has a very primary role. Let me first address the church and probably other religions, but I'm familiar with the church.
Okay.
The salt of the earth, the church, the salt of the world, the light of the world, the voice of reason, and the voice of prophecy, the voice that should be able to call to order every other abnormal situation and subject it to the sanity according to the word of God. I believe that is the primary role. The church should be the voice of reason. And I believe the mosque too should be the voice of reason, which is not biased, which does not openly show it is whatever partisan inclination, but perhaps is a political one way or the other. Of course, there are other things we expect the church to be doing or the religious to be doing, including grooming leaders that are value-based. At the ANT, we believe in value-based leadership, grooming leadership along a value system of integrity, a peaceful coexistence, and so on and so forth. There are also developmental aspects of religious institutions, and we are all familiar with them. But let me tell you, Harold, and the listeners, the participants in this dialogue, the problem is that the church, it's not that the church or the religious leaders do not know. They know what they're supposed to do. And what has brought us to this crisis is like Alaso begin to write letters to nobody, begging that they open up places of worship. It's the extreme self-censorship that our religious leaders have given to themselves. And why? the self-censorship. One, because of fear. Two, because of the niceties that happen to some of them when they get to some of those places. Three, because they have reached a point where they think the leadership of this country, President Museveni, cannot be corrected. They have abandoned their place of divine authority to correct error in government, to correct error in community, and they have now decided to be subjects. When they go to State House and they hold the prayer, they think all of us have held the prayer. The scriptures tell me, and even I want to disagree with the Bishop Zach, my good friend, and many of the people who are feeling nice, I'm not saying Bishop Zach is feeling nice, but there are people who are saying we should worship at home. My Bible has not been amended. My Bible gives the place to worship, but there is also the place for corporate worship. And until the scripture is amended for me, I'm willing to subject myself to any person who says I should forego congregational worship.
Two follow-up questions on that point, Honorable. One, do you think the spiritual leaders in Uganda have betrayed their followers? And two, do you think that Ugandans are sitting on their rights as far as this point is concerned?
Yes, my answer to both questions is yes. I was actually was disappointed but not shocked by the silence of our religious leaders. Because I asked something, I said, is Corona or COVID tied to the church pews? Is it that when you go to church, that's when you find it there waiting for Christians? And up to now, I haven't heard what a religious soul of Uganda or Uganda Joint Christian Council or any, I have not heard what the Pentecostals, what the born again faith, what all my leaders have said to the president. The president must be told that the Bible says, let my people go and worship me. And that the president must know the consequences of blocking people from worshiping their God. Because if anything happens to this country, both the priest, the prophet, and the king are responsible.
Very amazing.
Secondly, the Christians like me, we are all in problems, and we are all a problem. Why? When you see this congregational worship is a victim of lockdown on the freedoms of association and expression. Let me even try to imagine that part of the problem which we have been suffering in the streets of Kala, in political rallies and whatever, while our religious leaders kept quiet, is now you are trying to invoke the Christian lawyers there. You're trying to invoke the same principles in the Constitution, the freedom of association, the freedom of expression, with those type of things. That is what you're trying to invoke, which suffered, and now it is being extended to scientifically. As Christians, they extend to scientifically. Before you know, we will all be in the same boat. You should have spoken when they came for the politicians. And you should now speak, and the politicians should speak for you. Otherwise, we are all in danger.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I think even the network has feared your anointing and the rage that you spoke to it towards. But you understand where she's coming from. Those who haven't read the article that she wrote, that has been the basis of our discussion, you should access it. And it's very interesting when she says that maybe the spiritual leaders have betrayed their followers, and that the Christians might be, and all religious people are seated on their rights. And it's on that point that I want my co-host Joyce to engage the next panelist. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you, Harold. This discussion, like you keep saying, is getting hotter and hotter. Thank you, Honorable Alice. No wonder your name means grace, Asiamit. I just wanted to read some comments that have come up on the webinar. One is from Tinka Aruho. She says, I agree to the fact that this pandemic situation and the unusual lockdown, and that this has brought with it some things like family conflict, stress, depression, things that would be handled to some extent by religious organizations. I would specifically go for controlled counseling sessions to be allowed so we do not have excesses like suicide coming in as a result of stress and depression. We also have a comment from Olivia saying government should therefore first state clearly under what terms and qualifications the religious policy is justified to apply to all different faith traditions, just like any other bill. How widely has it been consulted? I'm sure one of us panelists is going to address this. And then we have Charlotte Nyangoma, who says, I personally think that churches should be open. As Christians, we say our help comes from the Lord. The Bible tells us that where two or more gather, the Lord is with us. Ministers can have meetings with social distancing measures. That should also be effected in places of worship. So for our panelists, food for thought. And now I'd like to introduce...
Maybe Joyce, before you engage the next panelist, there are interesting comments coming through Facebook, and we call upon everyone to keep engaging us. One, James Amanyele seems to suggest that we should strongly differentiate between religious leaders and faith leaders. And another participant is saying that I don't think we should think that the church is at the mercy of politicians, and politicians who confess Christianity and other religions should stand up for what they believe and know it's right. We also want to remind everyone that is participating in that this is not just a Christian-based discussion, but it's for all religions and faiths. We actually wanted to engage one of the Muslim clerics, but for reasons beyond our control, it was unable to happen. So just keep on the comments coming on Twitter, Facebook, and on Zoom. Joyce, the next panelist, please.
Thank you, Harold. One has just come in that is quite burning. It's saying, this is from Ernest Katwesije. Interesting that His Excellency continues to have services in State House, and yet for us, he doesn't want us to. So some food for thought. Now for our next panelist, this is Mr. Arthur Ayori Chire, who's the board secretary of Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity. Everyone has been talking about this institution, Uganda Christian Lawyers. You know the law, and at the same time, you know your faith-based. So in that situation, being in that privileged position whereby you are board secretary, you are a member of seeking justice for all in society through provision of legal services, legal education, research, policy, and advocacy for all vulnerable groups. What is your take on this whole situation, being both a Christian and legal practitioner? Is the call to open and restore congregational worship justified in the light of COVID-19? Mr. Arthur, over to you.
Thank you, Joyce, for this wonderful opening. After all these have spoken, I am just trying to scale myself on where to start from. One, I would first by saying that the church, the religious bodies seem to have relegated their place, their position, and the authority to the government. And so this is where it starts from. I see when they are going to elect a bishop, the government comes with a vehicle that gives the bishop. So what is the bishop supposed to do? If they don't do what the government wants, then the car will be withdrawn. And so clearly there is no the state and the church. That's the first place. Secondly, I would say that we, in one or the other, we have relegated our obligation in what we are supposed to be doing. And so I'm coming from a position of saying we have to look for solutions on what we have to do to overcome this, what is happening. This is how I would state it, that this has been a systematic attack on our foundations, one as believers and two as a nation. I don't want us to see this as an isolated item from the whole setup. 2 years ago, up to now, we have been in and out of the religious faith, that bill that has been coming forth, back and forth to Parliament, getting out, getting back to the department. It has been going on, and I would like us to just read the objectives of that bill. I just want to read just the overall objective of the Religious Organizations Bill of 2018. It is to establish, manage, and wind up religious organizations and places of worship and the regulation of their activities in order for the freedom of religion as safeguarded by Article 29(1)(c) of the Constitution to be exercised and enjoyed by all. What does that mean? That there is a lot that is being incubated over time. And its intention is that your activities as faith-based communities will be curtailed, will be regulated, will be controlled, so that when the state wants to communicate a position, it will go through the church. If they say tomorrow there is no this, the church will be the first person to implement it. Why? Because they know they are now part and parcel of the state. And I think that's where we have to come from before we even go on to blame any person. So my position would be, can we look for solutions on what we can do? Because
yes, Arthur. I think.
Sorry, I seem to have lost my connection on that.
Yeah, he's back.
You're back now. We can see you.
Ah, thank God. And so he who.
Hello, Arthur. You have muted your sound, so we can't hear you.
Sorry, I am saying, like the English saying goes, he who pays the piper determines the tune. And so, where do we start from? How do we help the situation? One is to analyze our foundations. I recall a month back, I went with UCLF members when we were challenging the establishment of the FBO bill. We went to the minister and we tabled our position as if this goes on. And I recall actually the minister threw us out of their office. I was with the council and he could testify to this. And so this has been happening. You might think that nothing is being done, but there is something that is being done. So all this is a systematic attack on what has been happening. And so in such instances, what do we do? It is a call for us to arise to our rights. Because if you sit on your right, really, it is very clear that you're going to lose it. And so the government, when it opens up a window market, it opens up a mall and curtails a church or a mosque. It shows you that that in itself is an infringement on the rights of religious bodies. And so there is a call to actually bring up a private, to bring up a public interest litigation, because there is no justification. You can imagine if you go to downtown and see what is happening, there is no justification whatsoever why a church should not be opened up or a mosque. And to my understanding, actually these religious bodies are more structured and organized. They have a common leader that can actually say, let us follow these soaps if they are there. And so there is no justification for whatsoever reason that religious communities should be closed down. And my word on this is that let's put our brains together and see how we are going to fight for the right of every person. Because if we don't, we are losing it, because there are people who are being paid to make sure that we lose it. And some of them, incidentally, they are in our midst. Some of us maybe attend their congregations. And so we just have to be very organized and structured and see how we are going to put this lion down. That's my take and my word on this.
Thank you, Arthur. Your submission has raised a lot of interest. You know, I'm seeing Ivan Baguma saying bars are open, yet churches are closed. I'm seeing Ernest Katwesi just saying, you're spot on, Councillor Arthur. He who pays the piper calls the tune. As church, we have dined and gone to bed long enough with the state. After church lockdown, partially open them under I think this is their recommendation. After church lockdown, partially open them under the control of the state and then dump them down with the FBO policy and act. In other words, they're saying we should arise and stand for our rights. These people are all reiterating what you're just saying. We are all crying wolf, wolf, but now we are looking to you. You are an organization which has the legal background. You know the law. At the same time, you're faith-based. So I don't think there's anyone in a better position.
I didn't think that Arthur would be coming to cry with us. I thought he would come with a solution.
Yes, because you're uniquely placed where you know the law and you understand faith. So with that combined knowledge, we are looking to you and saying, you know what, give us a way forward. What should we do? You know, how do we move from where we are to where we want to go? We all know that we want the churches open, but now you're in the position whereby you know how to do it the legal way. So could you please respond to that?
Okay, thank you very much. We have a responsibility. That one I have to consider. We have a responsibility that we have to do, one, to the people, two, to as Christians, especially to Christians or people that are being affected every day. Because I am both a Christian lawyer, I am both a lawyer and a Christian. And so the same that is happening to my brother Harold, I think it does not take me alone to bring up that. It is going to take up a combined effort. How do we join hands to make sure that we fight together as a team? Because we have identified the problem. We know what is happening in and around us. So the thing would
Which
be,
is our very question. How?
Yes, my how is one. We want to raise resources to put a petition. If it is a petition, there's a time when we raised up a petition against the government, and we went to religious bodies to be respondents, and they refused. And so they refused to be respondents. We have had these things happen. People that are here know that. We have come to them on a number of instances. We have this, we want to present this petition against the rights of believers, and all of them are shining out. We can't come against the government. You see, we are getting this interest. We seem to be conflicted. And so we have been let down also by very many bodies that are supposed to be coming up for this. Because as an individual, I can bring up my petition, but when I have Harold, I have Emma, I have Bishop, I have Joyce, we are an able force that is going to show that we have statistics of what is required to file a petition.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Arthur. You've provided one way forward. You're talking about a petition. And in that regard, I would like to remind all those watching us that we're carrying out a survey, which I think is going to be shared, and we want you to vote so we can hear from you. This is your moment to speak. And just before I hand over to Harold, I just wanted to share Elizabeth Namakula's comment, which is we should not have food and relief distribution in places of worship by government because they are designated community halls or centers for such activities. And then Fiona Chigozi says the Constitution allows for separation of church and state. How does the state then come in to control church activities? Thank you, Arthur, for now. And now over to you, Harold.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce Katende. We have a value of comments coming through Facebook. Participants flowing in. We have Theos Francis, Senyonga Simon, Primak Chomugisha, Tendo Ann, Shekina Elvis, Leo, Tayewa, James Amanye, Martha Elvis, and Monimo. And we have more people that are tweeting about us. And I would like to remind you of the hashtag, that is Freedom of Worship UG. Thank you very much for whoever is participating. And those who are attending via Zoom, shortly an opinion poll is going to be sent on your screens to vote and tell if you think religious places of worship should be open to congregational worship. For those who are watching via Facebook, you can just type your yes or your no, and it shall be taken into account as we proceed and to gather the way forward. I liked what Arthur was discussing, because instead of blame games, it's everyone's call to participate to make sure that these rights are upheld. And it's on that point that I would like to bring on course Miss Evelyn Naikoba. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Harold.
Okay, Evelyn, for those who do not know, is the CEO of Cornell Company Limited. And I'll just summarize her CV. She's a chartered governance professional with an LLB from the University of Dar es Salaam, and also a diploma in legal practice at the Law Development Center. She also holds a master's degree in with specialism in strategic planning. And she has also worked in the AG's office, the people that would be defending any suits in case it came, but that is all in her past glory. She has also worked at the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. I have to turn the pages for her CV, for it is too long. And she's currently the CEO of Cornell Company Limited, an organization that is mandated for fair, excellent, and consistent administration of the access to justice, among others. And you're very welcome again, Miss Evelyn. And I would like to engage you on a series of things that are a little different from what others have been discussing. If you remember, the president remarked during the Matters Day scientific celebration that the reason why the places of worship were actually closed was because they would have the virus spread like a bushfire. Isn't it therefore irresponsible to have ourselves be responsible to blame in case of a catastrophe that would arise in case the religious institutions are opened? So what is your opinion pertaining the opening of chances, and is it a responsible call for such a time as this? Over to you, Evelyn.
Thank you very much, Harold. Thank you to the moderators and my fellow panelists. I am honored to be a part of this discussion. If I got you correctly, your question is whether it is irresponsible for us to be discussing that places of worship should be opened at this point in time. Maybe we need to understand why the lockdown, and maybe that will be my starting point, while the lockdown was initially installed. When you have a situation where you do not know what this disease is about, what its impact is, its disseminating effect, then perhaps it makes a bit of sense to lock down. Reason being, people were initially panicked about it and in a lot of fear because they hardly had any kind of information about it. That said, I cannot say that that justifies, with specific reference to the religious community or the faith community, that the decision that was taken by the president in consultation with the Interreligious Council of Uganda was fully representative of the faith community in Uganda. As Council Kandia ably mentioned, we comprise 99.8%, and that's quite a big percentage. So whether that decision was actually fully representative of each and every Ugandan is questionable. But be that as it may, we cannot entirely blame the president because he purportedly acted on the advice of the Interreligious Council. As Honorable Chris Baryomunsi stated, I think a day later when Honorable Angeline Osege was disputing the closure of churches specifically, and he told her, look here, the Interreligious Council met with the president yesterday and they rubber stamped the decision to have the places of worship closed. But, maybe we might not cry over spilled milk. The good news is this: the president has an opportunity to reverse that decision, emphatically so, as stated by Honorable Alaso and my other fellow panelists. The president of Uganda is the head of state. but he has never been the head of faith. He can never, he has never, he will never. Matters of faith are beyond the control of the leadership of this nation. What the president is responsible for is to lead the state. When it comes to matters of faith, those are matters that are very intricate and very delicate and cannot just be treated lightly. So it is wrong for him to assume a position where he thinks he can open places of worship as and when he pleases, he can close them as and when he pleases. But then again, he's acting on the advice of the Interreligious Council. So as one of the questions that was put across, are our religious leaders truly representing us well? That is a debate that we can have at another point. Secondly, from a constitutional law perspective, and maybe just to go back to that, we've seen presidents like Trump that have reversed the initial decision and declared places of worship as essential because they truly are, for reasons that my fellow panelists already mentioned, both leadership-wise, both emotionally, building people's spirits, the counseling that is offered. Bishop Zach mentioned that religious leaders, and as can be traced far back, have always played a central role in disaster management. They offer food relief, but also, more importantly, they offer spiritual counseling. What is happening in Uganda today is we have many desperate people. We have people who are despondent. We have people who have lost jobs, people who have lost their loved ones, people who have bills, people. There's so much. Gender-based violence rates have gone up. Teenage pregnancy rates have gone up. Now, unfortunately, we're not seeing the state offering certain solutions. But even if it did, it can only cater to the physical perspective, which it hasn't yet done to the satisfaction of Ugandans. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all these kinds of complaints that are going on. There's a spiritual side to every human being, and the state will never be able to cater to that. That can only be catered to by the spiritual leaders. So that said, it's important that we emphasize to the leadership of this nation. They might have been misguided to take a decision relating to matters of faith, but it is not too late to reverse that decision. Secondly, from a constitutional law perspective, Bishop Zach and Honorable Alaso are a bit tired of hearing that word being thrown about, but every Ugandan enjoys the right to exercise the freedom of worship, freedom of religion, thought, conscious belief, and manifest that belief whichever way they please. That means, from the statistics that we have, majority of Ugandans are affected across the faith spectrum, not just born-agains, not just Muslims, not just Catholics, but all across the faith spectrum. So in effect, what these lockdown regulations are doing is that they have limited the rights of the Ugandan citizenry. Now, we have instances where rights can be limited. One of them, which could have easily been done, is to declare a state of national emergency. The directives that we have are symptomatic of state of national emergency, but it was never declared. In a state of national emergency, as empowered under Article 110 of our Constitution, it enables or it affords the government the opportunity to do away with certain rights that they ordinarily would not be able to do away with. In our case, as is the case today in Uganda, that has not been declared, okay? So even in instances where rights can be limited, we have tests under Article 43. Number one, it must be acceptable in society. Number two, it should be justifiable in a free and democratic society. Number three, it should pass the proportionality test. Proportionality looks at different angles. The objective of the limitation vis-a-vis the effect of the limitation. Number two, it should look to reinstate people's freedoms at the earliest opportunity. What we are hearing, well, I wouldn't call them rumors because Minister Cheng, Jen Ruther Cheng has hinted at it, Judith Nabakova has hinted at it, that if Ugandans are not disciplined, we could have another bout of a lockdown, which is very unfortunate because we should be looking to reinstate people's freedoms, Ugandans' freedoms, as opposed to further limiting. So even from a constitutional law perspective, we should not be in a position where our rights as Ugandans are being limited. The freedom of worship is a sacrosanct right, and until the government of this nation can show cause as to why it should be limited, it ought to be respected. Now,
let me just interrupt you on that point, Evelyn.
Yes, please.
You are discussing to what should be done. I will just draw your attention to the security briefing that happened yesterday, where the police spokesperson, Fande Nanga, said that briefly, yesterday, but one alone, they had arrested 52 Christians in Goma, Mukono municipality, 19 in Makanga, and other 50 in Kabali. So people are being arrested, and we seem to be locked in a port. So what is taking place in other jurisdictions? How are they handling this? For those who have opened, what are the measures they are putting in place for control? And those who have locked up, what is their justification? So just help us discuss through that in comparison with what is taking place in Uganda.
Okay, Harold, just allow me to get to that in a bit. Reason being that what is happening currently and the reasons for the lockdown should help to guide us on what we should do vis-a-vis what other states are doing. So what I wanted to discuss as well from a slightly medical perspective, I'm not a medical expert, but I have done some research that has been produced by our medical professionals. Number one, we can look at different aspects. There's an asymmetric impact by age. What does that mean? Which age bracket is largely affected by this coronavirus? Okay. Initially, when this pandemic broke out, the only data that we had was from China. Okay. What China had produced was that the infection fatality rate was about 3.4%, which is quite high. Okay. And what was a known fact from the onset was that this disease largely affects the older population. All right. Now, as the months went by and as more data started coming in, we started to learn that the infection fatality rate, which is really looks at the infection as well as the death rate, is not as high as we had initially imagined it to be. Why am I saying this? CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, the leading public national health institute in the US, published just recently, I think May, June, that their initial prediction of it being at 0.8% had dropped down to 0.3%. Stanford researchers also produced their own statistics. Oxford University produced their statistics. So what does that mean? That our initial fears as Ugandans have been lightened. Why? Because what had initially been projected to be very deadly is not that deadly. I am not saying people don't fall sick. I'm not saying people don't get infected, but it is not as bad as what it had projected. Now, with relation to the demographics of the impact by age, we said it usually affects older persons, right? The good news for Uganda is that we are largely a young population. Okay, only 0.2% of our population is above 64%. The greatest percentage, which is about maybe 48.4%, is between the age bracket of 0 to 14. Then we have another one, the next one, which is about 28%, is between 25 to 64. Then we have 15 to 24. So what does that mean? That even in instances where people fall sick, the infection rate, and maybe that's why you sort of see the difference in Uganda vis-a-vis other states, okay? Italy just recently reported that 90% of the people that passed away from or got infected from the coronavirus were over 88 years of age and had other related illnesses, meaning it wasn't only the coronavirus that had caused their death. It only triggered it. So they already had other illnesses. That's number one. Number two, with a population demographic as we have, okay, meaning that the rate and the magnitude of
let's come through that one. Time is not our friend.
Okay, what is largely at hand for us means that our population is advantaged. Okay, in the sense that we even see from the statistics that Ministry of Health usually gives to us, yeah, they have managed to treat and discharge quite a number of patients. Just yesterday, I think they discharged 47, which was quite a high number. And they've been able to treat them with ascorbic acid and hydroxychloroquine, meaning even in the absence of vaccines, we still have some form of treatment. So I do not see why churches should be marginalized or places of worship should be marginalized and state that we can only think about them when a vaccine is in place. The other side of why places of worship should be open is the emotional side, the spiritual counseling, the help. Human spirits need to be fed, okay? I think I will not repeat that a lot because Bishop Zach and Honorable Alaso mentioned that. So basing on just those statistics, I honestly do not think that Uganda is in a... And we have not had any deaths, surely.
Finally,
what is the worst?
In 1 minute, Evelyn, in relation to the religious and faith-based organization policy, do you think the measures that were announced in the wake of COVID-19 are a representation of a bigger problem at hand? Just in 60 seconds.
Most certainly. Our biggest problem, by the way, is not so much the lockdown. That is just a symptom of a bigger problem. And I will juxtapose the two. I like that Council Arthur talked about the religious policy. Number one, one of the fundamental reasons for why the religious policy was put in place is so that freedom of worship, how people worship, can be regulated. So it states that while the Constitution provides for the freedom of worship, it doesn't provide for how freedom of worship should be exercised. What we have currently is the government telling us how we should worship. Stay in your homes, do it in solitude. God is omnipresent. God has always been omnipresent. But by the time people feel the need to leave their places and go to a corporate worship session, that means there's something that corporate worship affords them that private prayer does not afford them. Number two, recently we had Minister Hakana Rugunda suggest that maybe there should be a fund where where religious leaders are paid or something like that. Now, if you're on the state's payroll, surely can you serve as a man or woman of God? Obviously not. Why? Because you're tied to their interests. You have to further their interests. Number three, we have an instance where the religious community, churches, have totally been left out of the discussion completely. In the last three addresses, we had nothing to do with religious places of worship. Minister Acheng, while giving a COVID update on Saturday, had to be reminded at the very end by a question on why places of worship are not being mentioned at all. And she fumbled around after gathering her thoughts to say they fall in the same category as educational institutions, which is not true. Reason being, there's currently a conversation on educational institutions. We're not saying anything about that regarding religious institutions. Now, if the only other possible way for life to return to normalcy is the vaccine, what does that mean? We could put ourselves in a dangerous position if we don't act at this point, where for you to be able to go to a corporate place of worship, you have to be vaccinated. For you to be a religious leader to stand before people, you've got to be vaccinated. And why is that the case? Sectors which have lesser protection under the Constitution are being allowed to operate. Surely, places of worship are more organized than Chikubo. And I'm not saying Chikubo people should not work. I'm not saying public transport systems should not work. They should, because at some point, life has got to continue. That is our fundamental tenet of our faith, that we should be allowed to gather as and when we please, but not according to the state directives. Yes.
Wow. Evelyn, I'm afraid that's all we had time for, but we can go on and on. The discussion does not stop after this webinar discussion. It can go on our Facebook and Twitter handles, and we will continue to engage you and even have the panelists answer some of the questions that were answered after this. Maybe Joyce can give us the sense, direction in these remaining few minutes of how we can proceed. Joyce, over to you.
Thank you, Harold. This discussion has really been, opening Pandora's box. And now when I look at it, I look at the fact that we only have 6 minutes left to end this webinar. What this means for all of us is definitely this is like episode 1, and there'll be episode 2 coming up shortly. Please follow this page, keep watching. And to our panelists, I don't know, we have 6 panelists, and I don't know who we can select to give us 1 or 2 remarks. I'm just going to go offhand, and I'm going to request Bishop Zach, and I'm going to request Honorable Allah. So please just give us 1 or 2 final remarks, and then we shall wrap up today's session. Thank you so much for participating, everyone. Please keep voting. Please keep sharing your comments. This is just one of many series. So Bishop Zach, I have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. This is a very, very eye-opening discussion from various angles. Let me just clarify one thing that seems to have been misunderstood in what I said. I did argue that the faith life, both of individuals and communities, is both in the gathering and in the scattering. And then we make a mistake to only focus on the gathering, because if we do not engage in the scattering, then we miss the essence of faith. The second point I make is that it's important to be able to consider the different faith traditions on how they understand gathering and scattering, as well as what they understand about gathering spaces. So somebody did comment and said, we can't use church buildings for stores. There are faith traditions for which that is not a problem. In the village community where I grew up, the very space in which we used to gather to sing and pray and hear the preaching was the same place in which the Mothers Union would gather and do their tailoring and everything. The same space in which, if there was food available, it could be served and eaten. So my third point is the nature of us who are having a conversation on webinar. It's possible that we too may be detached from the majority of Ugandans and how they express faith and how it is. And I heard somebody say social distancing is very easy because churches have compounds and so on. And I'm thinking, you're thinking about particular churches, you're thinking about particular mosques, particular gatherings. And I think we really need to do a lot more work on the nature of religion and faith and what COVID-19 lockdown has done to us. My last point is this, that mandates are not given, mandates are taken. It's been clear in this conversation that the religious leadership of this country, in all their shades and doctrines, are absent in engaging the state. I would like, as a way forward, that the next webinar is not with us who are crying religious leaders. Gather the religious leaders in a conversation and get them to speak. Because you see, the activist in me is that you don't challenge state power by having webinar conversations, not by Twitter handles. No, state power is challenged by organizing. And I like the idea of petitions and all those other forms of arguing. But you see, religious leaders are community leaders. They actually wield influence and power in our society. And for that space to be surrendered, to be given to the state, is really one of the unfortunate things that COVID-19 lockdown has manifested. And I simply call upon us to find ways in which the voice of leadership from the other than the state, in this instance, religious and faith leaders, I think we need to find ways in which that voice is amplified and heard. And so my plea, maybe the next time we have a conversation like this, let's have the religious leaders. Let's hear why they are, how they are, where they are, what informs. We can be here critiquing and suggesting all sorts of things. Let's possibly engage with them. And maybe then go out of that to create a way to engage with each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bishop Zach. And finally, thank you so much, Bishop Zach. Finally, Honorable Alice.
Thank you very much, the organizers of this discussion. My thoughts are: one, Cromwell and the team, please help us develop guidelines with which the church can implement the Ministry of Health guidelines and submit them to Dr. Jane Ruth Acheng, publish them, give them to UJCC to prove to them that we are ready to adhere to the Ministry of Health regulations. Two, I am calling on to feel passionate about congregational worship, to spend time praying and fasting, that the obstacle to congregational worship is removed. Three, let's start an online petition. 4, Christian prayers go to court. If you don't need us at this time, help will come for us. This really president of Uganda, what is let go so that they may worship me. Unless you have other reasons for locking us out of worship, that will be sought for. For now, we appeal to the president, let God's people worship him. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Honorable Alice, and to all our panelists for those words of wisdom. I'll just conclude with one comment from Jonathan Mwesigwa, who says, he's quoting Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke a truth saying that the church must be reminded that it's not a master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. Those who call for separation of church and state deny the responsibility of devout people to speak truth to power. From me, this has been Joyce Katende, and I hand over to my co-host. Thank you so much. Please continue the discussion, and please keep watching this for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all who have participated. I would like to give special thanks to all our panelists. Without mentioning names because of time, we are indebted to you for participating and opening our eyes to some truths. And for everyone who has followed us on Zoom and Facebook, and those who have sent in their comments and questions, may God richly bless you. And we hope to engage each and everyone that is here. If you have solution, you are the voice that is needed for a change. We thank the organizers, Crownell, and all the sponsors and every support staff that have been working in the background. We thank you, and your efforts are noticed. Thank you for joining in. God bless you. Till next time. Shalom.
God bless you too, and bye-bye.